The Islam that they're following today is a fake Islam. It's a false Islam. It's an Islam that leaves the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala open for anybody to interpret or manipulate in a false fashion and utilize it to commit acts of terrorism or to bring to power false governments or to implement laws that serve agendas from the devil or from the shaitan. Lanatullah alayh. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الإمام المهدي وسلم تسليما السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear sister Samah.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته سيدي أبا الصادق. Thank you so much for this great honor today.
The honor is all mine. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So today we want to talk about a very important topic, and that is the qadiyya of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, the case of Imam al-Mahdi. Because we are and have been for a while now coming out and speaking in the public, and we're proclaiming to the public that we are speaking on behalf of, rather we are sent by the command of the Imam of the time, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, the 12th Imam, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam. So when we make this bold proclamation, people naturally wonder, okay, if you are sent on behalf of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, what is it that Imam al-Mahdi has to say? What does he want to announce? What is his case? What does he want from us? What are our obligations? What makes him appear in this time? And what is it that Imam al-Mahdi is calling to? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And so basically, the 12th Imam, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, he comes forward in this particular time because the Muslims are all astray and they had broken their covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is something which is known for all of the Muslims, Sunnis and Shia. They both have a plethora of narrations which mention that by the time that the character of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam returns or appears in the nation of the Muslims, he would appear and come to them in a time where they are so far away from what Islam initially was that the religion that they're upon would resemble nothing to the religion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would think that they're upon guidance, but they're not. They would have glamorous mosques and masjids that are decorated in fancy ways, beautiful pulpits, and they would have many followers. But the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that in those times they would be as numerous, as the stars in the sky, but they would be like the scum of the earth, right? Or the scum of the sea. They would be useless. Their mosques would be empty of guidance. Their leaders would be traitors, right? Their presidents, their prime ministers, their kings, they would be useless. They would be traitors to Islam. They would be called by the name of Muslims, but they would be the furthest thing from it. Their scholars would be traitors as well. The Quran itself would be lifted from the nation of the Muslims, and nothing would remain from the Quran except for its writing, right? But its substance, it would be no longer there. And the reason why the Muslims reached to such a state of degeneration and such a state of being that they are so far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is because of their breaking of the covenant and their breaking of the commandments of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and them going against the Quran. And in one particular commandment, and that was the commandment that the Prophet gave the people, and it was mentioned in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saying that when he said that I do not ask you, right, for payment in regards to what I have done or what I have given, but I only ask you that you show love to my kinship, right, my kinfolk, my family. And the Muslims showed the opposite of love to the family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of the words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the Quran. Anything that he says is the Quran, right? The Quran is what's in the book, and the Quran is all of the commandments and all the words that the Prophet says outside of the Quran, right? Yeah. And that's why the Quran says that, nothing that comes out of the Prophet's mouth is said, right? Nothing comes out of it except that it's inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And on numerous occasions, the Prophet Muhammad made it very clear for the entire nation that he was going to appoint Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi as the successor after him in order that he may safeguard the nation. And on the night of his passing, he wrote a will as well, where he dictated to Imam Ali in front of several of the companions and household members of the Prophet Muhammad the names of all of the successors that would come after him one by one by one. He mentioned that there would be 12 Imams, and he mentioned that there would be 12 Mahdis. Even though the Muslims knew that the Prophet Muhammad, to be a wise man, that any wise king, any wise ruler, any wise prophet, that all of the prophets that came before, even the Holy Quran says that Solomon inherited David, right? That David appoints his successor, which is Solomon, even though they knew that Moses had appointed Aaron as his successor. And after the death of Aaron, he appointed Joshua, son of Nun, even though they knew that in the Holy Quran, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who appoints, because Allah tells the angel, verily, I'm making a caliph in the land. They tried to disregard this idea that the Prophet Muhammad would appoint a successor after him, even though the Prophet Muhammad at the event of Ghadir, he stands in front of 70,000 Muslims and raises the hand of Ali ibn Abi Talib in front of the entire nation. And he says, whoever I'm the master of, Ali is his master, right? And he says that right after he asks the people, he says, do you not say that I have more of a right over you than your own selves? And they say, yes, O Rasulullah. So then he says, okay, well, if I'm your master, then he's your master. Oh Allah, be a guardian to all of those who take Ali ibn Abi Talib as their guardian, right? And be an enemy to all of those whom take Ali ibn Abi Talib as an enemy. So he makes it clear that all of the powers, all of the authority, all of the rank that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had with the Muslims, what they owed the Prophet Muhammad, all of that now is owed to Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. They disregard that. And after the Prophet's death, they gather in a conspiratorial fashion, and they decide that the Arabs, the tribes that were existing at that time, they didn't even wait for the Prophet to enter into the ground according to the narrations. He wasn't even buried at the time. And what happened is that Abu Bakr and Umar and a lot of the other companions, they left Ali ibn Abi Talib to wash and prepare the body of the Prophet Muhammad. And as he was busy with that, what did they do? They went and they began to, argue with one another over who was going to be the successor of the Prophet Muhammad. Was it going to be one of the Muhajirin who migrated with the Prophet to Medina from Mecca, or is it going to be one of the Ansar, one of the people from the city of Medina that received the Prophet, right? They started to have this back and forth. The people of Medina would say, no, we're the ones that gave the Prophet enforcement here in a city, actually, so it should be from us. The Muhajirin said, no, we were with the Prophet from the very beginning. It should be one of us. And then in the end, they settle upon pledging allegiance to Abu Bakr, right? This is who they all gathered and agreed that they would follow. And the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam state that this act of treachery, of betrayal to the household of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so severe that it basically placed a curse upon this nation. And Iblis, La'natullah alayhi, was the person who orchestrated the entire affair. And he was actually so happy on that day that he manifested himself in the appearance of an old man. And he was the first person, an old sheikh, and he was the first person to pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr. When they finally settled and agreed that Abu Bakr would be the rightful heir to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so the nation was now upon misguidance. They had done the opposite of the will of the Prophet Muhammad. They had usurped his caliphate immediately after his death, and they continued to fight the family of the Prophet Muhammad. They had to go quickly and attempt to force Ali ibn Abi Talib to pledge allegiance when him and his wife, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, who was pregnant at that time with a child, a baby boy named Muhsin, and Al-Hassan and Hussein were in the house. They had refused to pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr and Umar, they decided that they're going to raid the house. They set the door of Fatima on fire. Imagine that. The Prophet just got buried. His family are mourning. His daughter, 6 months haven't even passed because she passes away 6 months after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. And they set her door on fire. And they basically kick the door in. The door smashes into the belly of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. And the narrations preserve this horrible tragedy and event where basically this causes Fatima Zahra alayhi salam to bleed out. She has a miscarriage. Muhsin passes away. And the injuries that she sustained from the nails in the door piercing her body cause her to pass away within 6 months from the passing of the Prophet Muhammad. They chain up Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. They bring him forward in front of these Arab Bedouin tribes, and they force him, right, to pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr, which he refuses to do. He keeps his hand clenched, but they force and take his hand and try to make him pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr, Lanatullah alayh. Then what happened is that they continued to oppress him. They refused to take the true version of the Quran, because now Imam Ali, he goes back to his house, he's defeated. His companions come to him. The narrations state that he asked the believers, to support him after they came forward and they said, Amir al-Mu'mineen, we're with you. He said to them, then meet me the next day with your head shaved and we will rise if that's the case. But unfortunately, the next day, none of the believers appeared. They had all been frightened to death by the new government in place, the government of Abu Bakr and Umar. And only 4 of his companions appeared on that day. Even one of them was late. And so Imam Ali alayhi salam, knowing that he had no supporters and having been commanded by the Prophet Muhammad to not lead an uprising against his oppressors after his death, unless he had 40 supporters, had no choice but to remain silent, or else they would have all been massacred and nothing of Islam would have remained, right? And so the narrations state that he remained in his home, and he began to write down over the course of the next 6 months the Quran in its entirety, right? As it came down on the Prophet Muhammad in its correct order, with accompanying with it the reason why each verse came down and all of its meanings, the tafsir, the correct tafsir of the Holy Quran as it was given to the Prophet by Gabriel alayhi salam. There's narrations that state that there was no other human being on the face of the planet that knew the interpretation of the Quran, every single verse of it, except for Imam Ali alayhi salam. This is what the Prophet said during his lifetime. And so in the very end, after Imam Ali compiles this entire Quran, he goes forward to Abu Bakr and Umar and tries to present it to them. And they say, no, we already have our version of the Quran. We don't need that version. And the narrations state that basically what these traders had done is that during the time where the Prophet Muhammad was being buried, and after the oppression of Fatima al-Zahra, and while Imam Ali alayhi salam was busy writing the Quran, what these guys did is they compiled their own Quran, right? And they asked every single person from the believers, the companions, the former companions of the Prophet, to bring forward any narration that they had from the Prophet. So all the hadiths, anybody who had a hadith, you had to write it down and bring it to Abu Bakr and Umar and his companions. And any verse of the Quran, they also had to write it down and bring it. And the narrations state that Abu Bakr and Umar, they burnt all of the hadiths, all of them. Anything that was outside of the Quran, they burn it. And nothing remained from the words of the Prophet Muhammad outside of the Quran, except that which remained in the memory of the people, that which they spoke to one another. Hey, I remember the Prophet said this or that. And the reason why they did this was so that they could control the information that was left for that generation and for future generations from the Prophet Muhammad concerning his family. And they took out of the Quran, according to the narrations, all those verses that came down during the life of the Prophet Muhammad that were formerly a part of the Quran, that were condemning the actions of particular Arabs. So any verse in the Quran that mentioned an Arab by name who was living at the time of the Prophet, one of the companions, they took these verses out. And they also took out all of the verses in the Quran, right, that praised the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam by name, that praised Ali ibn Abi Talib or Fatima al-Zahra in an apparent way, or Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein. They took all those verses out so that people would not rebel against the government of Abu Bakr and Umar and want to stick to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. We're not making this stuff up. This is all verifiable. People can look it up themselves in the narrations that were left to us by the family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then now you have Islam breaking down into these two sects. A sect that is called Sunni Islam, all right, or will end up being called Sunni Islam. And it's basically the people who follow these official, verifiable hadiths that were left by this council of traders after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. And you have the Shia, right, what would end up being called the Shia Islam or Shia Muslims that disregarded these, that knew that it was a treachery that was going on. They said, we're not going to follow this nonsense. And they only followed the hadiths from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. The narrations from the Ahlul Bayt are the ones that have told us, Fatima, Al-Hasan, Al-Hussein, Imam Ali, they told us that this is what took place during that time period after the death of the Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him and his family. So essentially we have the friends of the Prophet saying one story, and we have the family of the Prophet saying another story. And the narrations state that the only names that they left in the Quran, they left it to kind of degrade the Prophet Muhammad. For example, they left in there, the only person out of the family of the Prophet Muhammad that they left his mention in the Quran was Abu Lahab. And they did that to kind of like degrade and prove a point that, look, the family of the Prophet themselves can be bad, don't follow them. That was the evil intention that was behind this act.
So basically they chose from the Quran what serves their agenda so that people would follow them. Try to convince the people that they are right.
Absolutely. So basically they fumbled the whole message, destroyed it. and they rearranged, and kind of poorly put together, because these guys didn't even memorize the whole Quran. They didn't even, there was barely any memorizers of the entire Quran. So how could they even put it together? They were, even their own narrations state, Samah. The Sunni narrations state that, like, some of the companions were like, "Oh wow, this surah used to be two times more, than larger than what it currently is. Oh, I remember that there was a verse in the Quran that used to be in there in the time of the Prophet that was called the verse of the stoning, but now it's not in there." Even Umar himself says that this was the case, that there was a verse of the stoning, or they say, "Hey, we had a verse of the Quran or parts of the Quran, but it was, I kept it underneath my bed and it was eaten by a goat or by a chicken, and it doesn't remain there anymore." So this is the type of this is the way that they dealt with the Quran. That this was the mentality that they had at that time, and the narrations from the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam state that true version of the Quran will never appear again until the time of the appearance of the Mahdi. Right? That the Mahdi is the one who's going to bring that true version of the Quran out, the 12th Imam, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam. And until that time, people will be following this fake Quran, and narration after narration after narration after narration after narration from the Imams, from the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, you'll find that there'll be a companion sitting with him, and he'll narrate a verse in a particular way, and the Imam will say, "No, that's not how it came down on Rasulullah. This is how it came down on the Messenger of Allah," and he'll recite it in a different way, right? Where the words are rearranged, or the verses are slightly rearranged, or there's additional words that are added to there that was taken out because the memory of these people were so bad, and the way that they arranged it was in a way that was not the actions of a believing people, but rather the actions of a people that were trying to steal away the caliphate from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam after his passing. It's a tragic thing which occurred, really. And Imam Mahdi alayhi salam has sent me forward to speak in plain English to the nations of the world, all of those people from the east all the way to the west, from the north all the way to the south of the globe, and to make them aware of the fact that they have been deceived, and aware of the fact that there was this great conspiracy that took place, and aware of the fact that the Islam that they're following today is a fake Islam. It's a false Islam. It's an Islam that, according to the words of the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, leaves the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala open for anybody to interpret or manipulate in a false fashion and utilize it to commit acts of terrorism, or to bring to power false governments, or to implement laws that serve agendas from the devil or from the shaitan. Then the great tragedy took place, and that was that after the Muslims experienced the horrible years that followed the death of the Prophet Muhammad, they became disillusioned. After having horrible years, a horrible couple of years underneath Abu Bakr, even more horrible years underneath Umar ibn al-Khattab, after now the Umar and Abu Bakr and Uthman had spread Islam through the sword, conquering and killing people all over Northern Africa and in Asia, and trying to build an empire in the name of Islam in a very ugly way. After companions had arrested companions and banished and exiled other companions that sought to speak up and tell the truth, like Abu Dharr, who was banished to the wilderness and left to die like an animal in the desert, even though he was one of the greatest companions, of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. after they had distorted the Quran, after many years of deceit and filth and injustice that occurred underneath Uthman ibn Affan, right? And Uthman basically placing into power all of his in-laws and the Bani Umayyah that would basically the family, right, of the Abu Sufyan and these guys that were the enemies of Islam, actually, and that were fighting the Prophet Muhammad. And we spoke about that on this channel in an episode in response to the scholars of the end times, right? This Sheikh Asrar Sunni guy. The Muslims became disillusioned. And actually, some of them rose up and they end up murdering Uthman because of their anger of the state of affairs. And the people literally, they repented and they ran and they grabbed Ali ibn Abi Talib, and they brought him forward and they forced pledge allegiance to him. They brought him out of his home and said, please save us. This is horrible what's taking place. We made a big mistake. That we betrayed you. You were the one whom the Prophet wanted, to be in power. We remember that the Prophet Muhammad said that if we would have followed you, that we would be eating from above us and below us and from every direction. You're the one whom the Prophet chose to marry his only daughter. The lineage of our Prophet only continues through you. You are the most knowledgeable of us. Abu Bakr, even when he got the Pledge of Allegiance, he stood in front of everybody and he said, I'm not the best of you, right? But what can I do? And so he admitted that he was not the best. But the Prophet said that you were the best of all creation. He said that you were the very self of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that you and him were created from the same light. What was wrong with us? How could we have gone so astray? They pledged allegiance to him, and immediately after they did so, and Ali ibn Abi Talib managed to rise to power, the forces of darkness and the forces of the enemies of Islam rose against him, and they basically began to fight him. Starting with the Battle of the Camel and going onwards into endless battles against basically the Khawarij, those people that, popped out of nowhere saying like, we don't accept basically any representative to rule over us. We only want God to rule over us. And we have the Quran and that's enough. And these other weird groups. And then basically the forces of the family of Abu Sufyan, the enemy of Islam, which was now headed by Muawiyah, who had appointed himself, as a ruler of the Muslims and was hell-bent on fighting Ali ibn Abi Talib for power over the Muslim nation. The caliphate of Imam Ali alayhi salam lasts 4 years. The 4 years is filled with Muslims just attempting to kill him and destroy him and his family. Eventually they succeed. An outlaw by the name of Abdurrahman ibn Muljam, Lanatullah alayh, a filthy creature, whom upon him is the curse of God and his messenger, manages to come in, walk in on Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib while he's in a state of prostration, and he strikes him very hard with full power with his sword on top of the head of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, cracking his skull open and causing him basically to die shortly afterwards. The successor who was appointed by Imam Ali in front of the entire nation was Imam al-Hassan. And Imam al-Hassan's name was also mentioned in the will of the Prophet Muhammad. And Imam al-Hassan was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, his first grandson. Can you imagine that? His grandson that the Prophet used to kiss and love, and who he said was one of the masters of all of the youth of paradise. Nobody gets into paradise except that Imam al-Hassan is his master. And yet this descendant of of Abu Sufyan, the enemy of Islam, the descendant of Hind, the liver eater who was eating the organs of the family of the Prophet, the organs of Hamza in the middle of the battlefield like an animal. He says, no, I don't accept. I'm the real ruler. All right. And he basically orders the assassination of Imam al-Hassan in such a filthy way. He basically manages to use one of the wives of Imam al-Hassan as an agent against him, and he pays her to poison Imam al-Hassan, and he gives her promises that if you kill your husband, I will marry you to my son Yazid, Lanatullah Ali, and that's exactly what takes place. She accepts the offer. She betrays Imam al-Hassan, just like the Quran says that many of the prophets and the messengers, they had wives that were traitors. And from those wives that were traitors are, the wife of Noah and the wife of Lot. And also Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he also had wives that were traitors. Okay, namely, two of them that are mentioned in the hadiths, very much so, and those are Hafsa and Aisha. They betrayed the Prophet Muhammad, and that's a whole nother story that we can go into, and that's why in the Quran, basically, God condemns them. And brings down these verses that speak about how their likeness is the likeness of the wife of Noah and the wife of Lot, who were told to enter into hellfire, and that God is going to replace them with better wives for the Prophet Muhammad, the ones that are the likes of Asya, the wife of Pharaoh, who was a believer, and also Mary, the daughter of Imran, right, the mother of Jesus Christ. Anyway, that's a tale for another episode, because Muslims are very sensitive about that, and they consider that Aisha and Hafsa are extremely holy, and more holy for the Muslims than even Fatima Zahra and the grandchildren of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even though nobody today prefers their wife over their grandkids, nobody prefers their wife over their own children. This just doesn't happen, but I guess it's supposed to happen with the Prophet Muhammad. There's always these different standards that they like to apply when it fits their own agenda, and it's just weird because these two people, Aisha and Hafsa, just so happen to be the daughters of Abu Bakr and Umar. Can you believe that? So let's move back to the main story. They poison Imam al-Hassan, they get rid of him, he dies, he passes away, and Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is now left. Imam al-Hussein ends up getting all of these letters, these pledges of allegiance to him, informing him that he needs to rise against this Yazid, right, and this Bani Umayyah empire that is being built. And the Muslims say, if you just rise, we will form an army behind you and we will stand by your side. And this is where the great tragedy of Karbala begins. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam receives these pledges of allegiance. There's so many that they fill an entire room this size, right? Just stacked up scrolls and pieces of paper, one on top of the other. There's so many of them from hundreds of thousands of Muslims across the empire, and especially in Iraq. And they call him and they say, come out. And basically, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, now it's obligatory upon him to respond. He has more than 40 supporters. He needs to go forward and respond to this call. And he takes his family members and he takes his companions, and they go out towards the land of Karbala, which is in modern-day Iraq. And they travel out there. And when they reach to the lands of Iraq, they find that, the forces of Yazid had already scared everybody, and nobody was willing to come out of their house to meet him. And they found that it was essentially a trap now. Yazid had managed to successfully bring Imam al-Hussein and his family out, and scare everybody from supporting them. And so everybody betrayed the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was left alone, and an army of Yazid surrounds him, an army of so-called Muslims whom loved Abu Bakr, loved Umar, loved Uthman, hated Ali ibn Abi Talib, fought against him, and they loved Muawiyah, son of Abu Sufyan, the enemy of Islam, and Hind, the liver eater. This army surrounds, at the command of Yazid, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and they begin to kill, murder, cut off the arms and the legs and shoot with arrows the family members of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi until they reach Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and they decapitate him. And they cut off his head in an ISIS-styled way. And they place his head on a spear. Now, here's the point where we would like to stop at. Because the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam stated very clearly that it was at that moment, as the head of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was falling down, that there was a caller, one of the angels underneath the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, called forth and he said that this nation is now cursed. This nation, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not grant it success, right? To celebrate neither a fitr nor adha. That they can neither celebrate a fitr nor an adha. These are the two Eids that the Muslims have. One of them is an Eid that ends at the end of Ramadan. And the other one is an Eid that ends at the end of
Hajj.
Exactly. So the caller, or the angel, the Imam from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, was essentially stating that this announcement from the angel underneath the throne meant that these Muslims were going to lose track even of the things that they had, between their hands, that they would never, until an avenger comes forward from the family of Muhammad and takes vengeance for the blood of Al-Hussein, the Muslims would never properly celebrate Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Adha, which means that they would lose track of the proper month of Ramadan and its form of fasting, and they would also lose track of the proper season to make Hajj in, and they would even lose track of what is the real Kaaba. And that's exactly where we find ourselves at today. The enemies of Islam continue to oppress and kill all of the children of Imam al-Hussein until the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, who's the Imam of the time, who's living, who's with us, who sent me forward to speak on his behalf, and proclaim to the people that this great injustice has taken place against him and against his family. So the Muslims, they lost to the family of the Prophet Muhammad. They angered Fatima al-Zahra by killing all of her children and murdering them. They decapitated Imam al-Hussein, whom the Prophet said that Al-Hussein is from me and I am from Al-Hussein, and God loves whoever loves Al-Hussein. So whoever doesn't love Al-Hussein, who's also a master from the youth of paradise, clearly God does not love them. The curse of God is upon them, right? The wrath and the anger of God is upon the one who decapitates the head of the master of the youth of paradise. It's basic common sense. Who are the ones whom did that? The companions of the Prophet. The former companions of the Prophet, the rulers over the nation of Islam, the ones whom preserved Islam, or basically changed Islam to look like what it is today. Those people are the same people that killed the family of the Prophet Muhammad. Those are the same people that we learn about today and we praise and we take our religion from them. Woe to them, curses of God be upon them and upon anybody who knows the reality of what it is that I'm saying and knows the history of Islam and still chooses to follow these individuals. Okay? So then except for those who are oppressed, obviously, and those who are ignorant, and those who have good hearts that actually love the Prophet Muhammad's family, but they just don't understand things. And that's why we're here trying to clarify for them. The nation had gone astray. The Prophet's grandson was killed. This brought great sadness onto the heart of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam from beyond the grave. It hurt her. The Prophet Muhammad said, Fatima is from me. Whoever hurts her has hurt me, and whoever hurts me has hurt Allah, and whoever hurts Allah, upon him is the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a great struggle took place. And the successors of the Prophet were pushed aside. The Prophet wanted these particular people to be in power, because if they were in power, they would have preserved the legacy of the Prophet. Right? It's common sense. Even today in America, you have a president like Obama, for example. Obama, he basically advocates for the Democratic nominee who would come after him, right? Who's running for president after him, because why is he trying to support his party's candidate versus the Republican candidate? Because the Republican candidate is usually indifferent with him on all of his policies. And so Obama made all of these new policies, put into law lots of things that he wants to preserve. And so he wants to ensure that the candidate that comes after him, his successor that comes after him, is on the same page so that his legacy is preserved. That's how it is all over the world with the different governments, with the different kings throughout time. The king, the leader, wants to appoint somebody after him who's his friend, who he knows, who he trusts, who he knows is going to continue on his same path, right? Or else we have scenarios, like in ancient Egypt, where you have like a queen by the name of Hatshepsut who will rule. And then the people that come after that want to wipe her remembrance, from history. And they'll start destroying all of the relics and the historical artifacts and the things that pertain to her. Or like they did with Akhenaten, right? Akhenaten. Because of the fact that he had changed the nation's religion from polytheism to monotheism. So after he died, the usurpers wanted to erase his existence from history. The king does not want that people like that come into power. Same thing here. Prophet Muhammad needs to ensure that his successors are going to preserve his legacy, right? Preserve his words, ensure that his will and Islam is preserved and practiced properly, and that the nation is filled with justice as it was intended to during his time. So there's no other way, because the Prophet is not going to live forever, that it be done except that he appoint his successors. And the appointment of his successors is an appointment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the great problem here. And this is the reason why there's this schism, this difference of opinion, this breaking of the Muslim nation into two groups, because one group says, we don't need the divine appointment. We don't want any divine appointment. It's enough for us to just have the Quran and have the pillars, and the practices. That we don't need this stuff. All we need to know is that God is one, and that we pray 5 times a day, and that we give zakat, and we fast the month of Ramadan, and we be good people, and we make Hajj once in our lifetime. That's enough for us. We don't need anything else. The Shia are saying on the other end that no, actually, the family of the Prophet said that you guys are confused now. You've lost already everything. You've lost Fitr, you've lost Ramadan, you've lost Al-Adha, you've lost Hajj, you've lost everything. And how can your prayers be accepted when you're taking as guardians over you the very people that murdered and massacred the family of the Prophet Muhammad? And so the case of Imam al-Mahdi, what he's trying to achieve is he's trying to reverse that which had taken place after the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's trying to wipe out this history that took place, this covenant that was broken. He comes with a new covenant, a new Islam, which he's inviting people towards, right? So that he can restore back the original religion in its pure form that had come down on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this whole case is the case really of the supremacy of God. This idea that people in the Quran, if you follow most of them, you will be led astray. That the masses of the people, anytime you see what it is that they did in history, you'll find that they were on the wrong side of history. They were following and supporting Stalin. They were following and supporting Hitler. They don't know what it is that God chooses for them. They support Abu Bakr and Omar. They choose for themselves something which is the opposite of what God intended. That God is the one who created creation. God is the only one whom has a right to appoint a leader. God makes that very clear in the Holy Quran when he says, Inni ja'alun fil ardi khalifa. I'm going to make a caliph in the earth. So it's him that chooses, right, who the caliph is. What is a caliph? A caliph is somebody who succeeds. He's a successor of God in creation. It's his representative. The Holy Quran says that he has not sent forward a single messenger except that he should be obeyed. So the role of the prophets and the messengers that were sent throughout time was to be obeyed, to be leaders. There's no space for any other will or person to rule except for God. And every time we have people that come forward ruling in the name of God, but not truly being appointed by God, what you have is you have a terrorist state, an illegitimate empire that pops up, and it causes havoc and chaos in the land, and it oppresses people, and you have wars that emerge. And you have perfect examples of this. Look what's happening in Iran right now. They don't have an imam that's ruling them, and yet they're ruling in the name of religion, and it's one of the darkest, most disgusting, vile states that has ever been created. And they've totally oppressed the Iranian people, these great people that were once that great civilization, that all nations in the entire world looked up to. These great people now are reduced to nothing more than people that roll around in the mud like pigs, and they crawl on their bellies like worms, and they go forward, and they are rubbing on mausoleums and believing in falsehood and misguidance, all because they're following people that were not appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And anytime you have somebody who's not appointed by God, he's automatically appointed by the darkness or by the devil, right? Because there's just two forces out there, good and evil, God and the devil. And if you're not on God's side, then you're automatically on the devil's side. And this is something which we see confirmed also in the Gospels and in Christianity. It's deeply ingrained in Christianity, and it's very clear during the scene of the temptation of Jesus Christ, right? That Satan tells Jesus that he'll make him, all right, the leader of the entire world, all of the nations. He can make them the leader. He can make him the leader of that if he only prostrates to Satan, which means that Satan is the one who appointed all of those who are in power. And he's the one who's actively seeking to crucify and destroy and kill and behead anybody who he does not appoint. Just like he destroyed Jesus, right? Or sought to crucify him and sought to behead Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. He's the one who appointed Yazid, and he's the one who appointed Pontius Pilate, and he's the one who appointed, all of the false kings and tyrants that are existing on the face of the earth. And so it is the deal or the case of Imam al-Mahdi. It's the desire, it's the message of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam and his commandment that, all people who proclaim themselves to be with God or really want God, that the first thing that they have to do is declare themselves innocent from all of the false tyrants that are ruling in the name of religion, but they're the farthest thing from it, like the government of Iran and these false leaders that are ruling over the Muslim nations, all of them, like Sisi in Egypt, or the family of Saud that are proclaiming themselves to be the custodians of the Kaaba and ruling in the name of Islam and using Islamic narrations and words that are twisted from the Prophet Muhammad for their own favor, saying that it's not allowed to go out on a leader. These people are all appointed by the devil. Imam al-Mahdi says, who's the rightful king? Who's the rightful heir over the Islamic nations? All those peoples, okay? I'm being very clear here. Islam should not be spread by the sword. But those people who are saying, we are Muslims and we just want what God wants, these people are now oppressed. Why are they oppressed? Because they have people that are appointed by the devil, false leaders, false rulers, that are over them, that are scaring them to death, that they cannot protest to the government. Why? Because if they protest, then they're going to be angering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So religious pressure is being applied to the Iranian people and the Muslims in Saudi Arabia and the so-called country of Saudi Arabia. I mean, the country is called after the name of a family. Isn't it ridiculous? Not even, it has the Kaaba in it. It's not called, Muhammad's Arabia. It's called Saudi Arabia. And the people are okay with that, but that's fine. And these false leaders that are calling themselves the Prince of the Believers, like this king of Morocco, and other than them, the peoples that are under them, they don't like them, and they are oppressed under them, and they want to get out from under them, but they're told that they can't, because if they do, they'd be going out against the Caliph, and the person who goes out against the Caliph is an outsider. They're Khawarij, they're a Murtad, they're an apostate, and they're going to end up in hellfire. So these people are scared. They're terrorized by religious, it's religious terrorism, really, is what it is.
They're using fear.
Huh?
They're using fear.
They're using fear to control people. And so Imam al-Mahdi, what does he want to do? He wants to free the people from that by letting them know that all of these people have no authority. They're all from the devil. They've all broken the covenant. All of the Muslim nation right now, they have no obligation. There is no Muslim nation, and there hasn't been a Muslim nation, and there hasn't been a Muslim rule since the time that they beheaded Imam al-Hussein. Rather, since the time that Amir al-Mu'mineen was in power and the people were fighting him, and they sided in the end with the family of Abu Sufyan. Imam al-Mahdi says that this concept of the supremacy of God is there in Judaism and Christianity. So don't let these other nations also try to fool you and tell you that, even the nations that don't believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they don't let them fool you or try to tell you that the answer lies in, in democracy or in any other form of government or rule. These nations that proclaim themselves to be Jews or Christians, if you look into their Bibles, if you look into their Torah, if you look into their religions, if you ask their scholars, you will know that the rule of God and his appointment of the prophets and the messengers, just like he appointed Adam, just like he appointed David and Solomon, just like he appointed Saul, and just like he appointed Samuel and the messengers, just like he appointed Moses and Aaron and Joshua and the judges that ruled, just like he appointed Jesus Christ as the Messiah, the people don't get a choice in that. God is the one whom appoints without taking their opinion, right? And he's the one who appoints the ruler, and the ruler is the shepherd whom is supposed to lead the people to that which God desires.
Abu Sadiq, the Muslims always believe, and they say that when Imam Mahdi comes, he will unite all the religions and it will become one religion, which is Islam. And when we think about it, that's exactly what you were saying, because how will he unite all religions under one religion, Islam, which is the supremacy of Allah, which is, as you just said now, it's in all religions. So all the religions, Jews, Christians, the Muslims, they all believe actually in the supremacy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is how Imam Mahdi will join all religions together back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which was always the case.
Yeah.
Which God...
Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, he upholds the religion of his forefather, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and people have freedom of religion, and nobody can force anybody to believe into anything, right? They believe in anything. Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, the son of Al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam, has not come to spread Islam by the sword or force any people of any country or any nation, right, to follow him. But what he has come to do is to send me forward, and just as he sent Imam Ahmad al-Hasan the Yamani to inform the enslaved people that they can free themselves from the oppressors, because it is not a religious obligation that they have to obey any of these people. And eventually, this message, this truth, this awakening that's going to take place, all right, in this call, this dawah, the people from the east to the west, from the north to the south, they're beginning to wake up, and they're going to wake up more and more, and they're going to realize that the words that are coming out of my mouth are coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and are coming indeed from the 12th Imam, and that the 12th Imam would never come with anything else other than this message, because this message is what makes sense, and it's clear, and it's there, just like the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam. They said, you know, well, one day Imam Sadiq was speaking to al-Mufaddal ibn Umar, and he was mentioning to him that there would be a day where there would be many banners all raised in the name of Islam. And Mufaddal ibn Umar, he cries, he says, oh my God, what a great fitna, what are we going to do in that day? You know, how am I going to be able to distinguish the truth? Imam Sadiq says, our matter is clearer than the sun in the middle of the day. There's nothing clearer than the sun. The same thing here. Of course, Imam al-Mahdi's case is the supremacy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, the people whom are existing in the times that lead up to Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam are appointed by the devil, and they are oppressors, and that's confirmed by every single narration that's in the hands of the Muslims today. They're all there. Sunni narrations, Shia narrations that speak about Muslims and the state of Islam in the end times and in the times leading up to that. How do you reach the end times where Islam is in a state of non-existence, except if it is continually getting worse and degenerating more and more and getting further and further away from the Prophet Muhammad in the years that led up to that, right? So after the Prophet Muhammad's death and until the time of the emergence of the Mahdi, everything is becoming worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, because they are choosing to follow the footsteps of those who came before and were condemned, the footsteps of the Christians and the Jews, whom ended up killing their prophets and their messengers and following their scholars and their priests, you know, and their false leaders, and electing and choosing rulers over them that were not from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and thus they became partners in the crimes that they had committed. You see, there's this hadith from the Ahl Bayt, it's actually from the Prophet Muhammad, and it says that the Prophet ﷺ said that if somebody was murdered in the East and somebody in the West heard about that and they were happy, they become partners in that murder. Upon their hands is the blood of that person just because they were happy about it. So imagine that. The murderer is happy because he killed somebody. Somebody else is happy because they share in this feeling of happiness. He is a supporter of him, and thus he's a partner in crime with him. So imagine how much of a partner in crime you would be if you actually go out to the polls and you are electing, right, and choosing and stamping and putting your fingerprint on a piece of paper, stating that you endorse and choose by your own free will this person to make all choices on your behalf in regards to everything, you know? So in the end, the person that you chose, not being appointed by God, not having in him the Holy Spirit, not being infallible, being a normal, fallible human being, is going to not make all of the right choices. They're going to make some right choices, some wrong choices. You will become a partner in those right choices, and you will become a partner in those wrong choices. And unfortunately, you're going to have blood on your hands because these leaders are always oppressing somebody. They're always silencing, murdering, assassinating their political enemies. They're always putting innocent people in jail. They're always starting wars and killing innocent men, women, and children. And so it's a very dangerous thing because you're going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment, and you're going to be charged with all kinds of criminal acts, and you're not going to know what is God even talking about. And you're going to stand there confused. And Imam Mahdi is trying to warn you, you will stand there confused and you're not going to know what to say. And then it's going to be revealed to you and you're going to be in a state of shock and you're not going to be able to say anything when God brings forward his case. And you'll realize that, oh my goodness, I'm being charged with all of the crimes of this king that I didn't even like, but I chose, or this prime minister, or this president, or this group of filthy scholars that were not appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I ended up accepting them and essentially worshiping them and believing them to be true. So Imam al-Mahdi is saying, declare yourself innocent of Abu Bakr and Umar and every other choice on the planet that is not God's choice. The Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, Imam al-Mahdi is reminding people of the words of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam when they said that they would punish every single nation for its sins that took as an imam, as a leader, somebody who was not appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that God said and swore upon himself that he would forgive the sins of every single nation that followed a leader or an imam that was appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it had all kinds of sins. Even if it was an imperfect nation, God would forgive them those sins and make them enter into paradise because they're following the David of their time, or their Solomon of their time, or their Moses or Joshua or Ezekiel or Aaron or Adam or Muhammad or Ali or Jesus or Simon Peter. Imam Mahdi is trying to awaken the people to this, awaken the people to the fact that, something very bad happened also after the lives of almost every single prophet and messenger. And Jesus, he was the Messiah. They rejected them. He appoints after him his successor, Simon Peter. He hands Simon Peter the keys to the heavens and to the earth. And he says to him, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. You have the rule of the heaven and the earth, just like the Pope. The Pope in Catholicism is supposed to be the successor of Simon Peter. And he's supposed to have earthly rule just as he's supposed to have heavenly rule. And that is why the Catholics insisted on the fact that the Pope has his own little country. Before, he was ruling all of the Christians, but they managed to lead a coup d'etat against him at some point, and they basically took all his land away because the rulers at that time thought that the Pope was illegitimate. that he was a fake Pope. He's not the real successor of Simon Peter. So they took all of the land away from him and they gave him this little area now in Italy, which is called the Vatican. It's its own country and he's the head of state of it. Why? Because the Christians recognize that they have in their very faith this concept of the supremacy of God, that you cannot rule over the Pope, that the Pope has to be a king, he has to be a ruler. The person whom God appoints has to be a ruler, or else what is the point of him being sent? And so they realized that this great contradiction could not be solved except if they, make a deal with the fake Pope that he has a piece of land in a little country, with 300 residents in there. So that is called the Vatican. And that all of the other countries, they can rule it in their own ways. So that same concept that existed in Christianity, it also existed in Judaism. It's there. God was very offended in the story of Samuel and Saul by the people rejecting the divinely appointed messenger, which was Samuel, and who was supposed to succeed him after that. He was offended by their suggestion that they needed a king, and you can read about that in Samuel in the Old Testament, and you can read about how the entire Torah is filled with God being angry every time the Israelites would take as their ruler a fake king who is not appointed by God. And every time that fake king would end up leading them to worship idols of gold and silver and golden calves and false gods. So, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, he's here, in short, to awaken the people, to lead in intellectual, spiritual revolution on the planet at this moment in time by awakening the people first in their hearts to the fact that they have been deceived and that they are not upon any religion, and that the covenant that God had with the Jews broken, with the Christians broken, and now with the Muslims is broken. And so if you want to be on God's good side, if you want to be one of those people that are going to go to paradise, then you have to, unfortunately, take Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam as your Imam. Okay, as your guide. You have to take him, because whoever, the Prophet says, dies and doesn't know the Imam of his time has died the death of ignorance. So the only way to salvation is to believe in the Imam of your time and to take him as the rightful heir to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What does that mean? That means exactly this. If the Prophet was alive today, what would he be for you? Whatever he would be for you, that is exactly what Imam al-Mahdi, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, is supposed to be for you today. Those who take Imam al-Mahdi as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi then they will be saved. And those who deny him or take with him other people as imams, such as Khamenei or Sistani or the Grand Mufti of Al-Azhar or the King of Morocco, etc., these people are committing polytheism. Monotheism is to follow and worship God. And the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam said that there are so many people that are committing polytheism in the world today. How, Samah? Because they are worshiping their scholars. The companion said, "Oh, what are you talking about? Nobody worships scholars." And the Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam and the Imams from the Ahlul Bayt, they clarified that worshipping somebody is by obedience to that somebody. They clarified and said that the verse in the Quran that says that they worshipped their rabbis and their priests was not talking about the fact that any Christian or Jew took a rabbi or took a priest and actually considered them to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one God who's invisible to all, but rather it's because they worshipped them through obeying them in all matters pertaining to religion. And thus these scholars caused them to basically made for them halal the haram and made for them haram the halal. And by doing so, they actually obeyed the devil, who put these scholars and made these mistakes and gave these false teachings to them. And by worshiping the devil, they ended up committing a great act of polytheism or shirk. And so the only way that we can ensure that we don't fall into the same mistake that they did is we have to declare ourselves innocent from every single scholar and imam who is not appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cannot listen to them anymore, people, in regards to religion. We have to put our foot down and we have to say enough's enough. The world is horrible. And the scholars that are, the Muslim scholars that are in the world now that are speaking in the name of Islam are only increasing it in horror and increasing it in filth. And they have no use whatsoever. We have to take an axe to these scholars, a symbolic axe, I'm saying. I'm not speaking about physical violence against any sort of scholar, but I'm saying that we have to smash these false idols in the head, like Abraham did when he took the axe and he went into the Kaaba and he began to destroy all of the false idols that neither benefit nor harm anybody. The same thing today, the living idols, the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, they stated that the idols of the time of the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam were talking, walking idols that wear the costume of the Messenger of Allah, that speak in his name. The likes of Abu Hanifa and all of these characters that made and became heads of new sects of Islam, and they weren't successors of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Islam must be returned to its original form. And so this spiritual awakening to the concept of the supremacy of God and declaring ourselves innocent from those false tyrants and leaders and the scholars that are enforcing them must be done before we can accept Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam as an imam. We cannot take Imam al-Mahdi, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, who is clearly appointed by the Prophet to be his successor. He was supposed to rule over all of the Muslims. He's the supreme authority, the head. He's the greater sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the supreme Ayatollah, not the fake Ayatollah of Iran. The real Ayatollah, the supreme leader, Imam al-Mahdi, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, may our souls be ransomed for him, is the rightful heir to the Prophet Muhammad that we cannot take as our king and our guide and the successor to our messenger, and at the same time elect all of these fake political parties and elect and obey all of these fake scholars of Islam. We have to declare ourselves innocent of them and only hold on to Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. And once we do that, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam is going to guide us into the rest of the truth. He's going to teach us and tell us about the halal and the haram. But we can't listen to him about the halal and the haram and also listen to the scholars about the halal and the haram. So we have to cut the ties with the scholars and we have to only listen to Imam al-Mahdi. Once we do that, we become real monotheists and we are upon the covenant of God with his messenger. And we are led in the end into paradise and we gain, the pleasure of God and his messenger. So Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, he has appeared. And as you know, he appeared in 2015. And he has sent me forward, and he's gathered and is gathering companions from all over the world, those people whom their fitrah is correct, whom their loyalty and their hearts is to Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. He's gathering them, and they are coming together and a new covenant is taking place, and a new people of God is being created, and a new beautiful form of Islam is being propagated, the true form of Islam that will leave no other fake, ugly, terrorist, evil, misguided form of Islam any room to stay on the face of the planet. So, inshallah, we'll stop there because that is a summary, a very long summary of the case of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam and what he is calling towards. And inshallah, in future episodes, we can talk about more and more of what it is that Imam Mahdi alayhi salam is calling towards in terms of jurisprudence and law and our obligations and knowledge and things that he's teaching us, and morals and manners, and the light that he has that he's propagating. Thank you so much for bearing with me this entire time, Samah. I hope I didn't talk too much or bore you in anything, and I hope that I was successful in delivering this great thing that I was entrusted with from the 12th Imam. And I have a special greetings from the 12th Imam to all of the believers out there who believe in this call, Imam al-Mahdi Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, as well as Imam Ahmad al-Hassan the Yamani. They send their peace and their salams upon all of the believers. And this is a glad tidings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to them. And alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you so much, Abu Sadiq, for this amazing episode. And inshallah, every person would lighten his heart will see the truth, because as you said, it's common sense and it's really like bright like the sunlight, this call.
God bless you, Simon. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.